You feel completely fine. No pain. No warning. Nothing that would make you think twice about your health. And then a routine scan comes back with 3 quiet words: mild fatty liver. Your doctor says it's nothing serious. Watch your diet. Come back in 6 months. But here's the question almost nobody asks in that moment. If your liver is already showing visible changes on an ultrasound, how long has this actually been happening without you knowing? That question is the reason this video exists. A fatty liver finding is rarely about the liver alone. It's usually the first visible evidence of something that has been quietly building inside your metabolism for years, sometimes for over a decade, long before any scan ever caught it. And if you're over 60, this matters even more, because your body has entered a stage of life where warning signs stop whispering. They start showing themselves. Most people just don't know how to read them yet. There's a reason so many people miss this window entirely, and it has nothing to do with intelligence or willpower. When a result comes back labeled mild, the brain quietly files it under low priority. Mild sounds safe. Watch your diet sounds like optional homework, not something urgent. Humans are wired to react strongly to threats that hurt right now, and weakly to threats that stay silent for years. A fatty liver finding is the definition of a slow, silent threat. That's exactly why it gets pushed to the bottom of the list, underneath 100 other things competing for your attention that same week. Noticing that bias in yourself is often the real first step. Not the diet change, the noticing. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the liver can carry serious changes for years without a single symptom. You'll learn about a visible mark that can appear on the skin, one most people mistake for harmless discoloration, that is actually one of the more reliable outward signs of a deeper metabolic issue. And you'll understand what genuinely helps a stressed liver recover, and what quietly keeps the problem going, because that distinction is almost never explained clearly. Let's start with what your liver is actually doing every single day. Ask someone and they'll usually say it filters toxins. True, but that's a small fraction of the real picture. Think of the liver as your body's metabolic control center, the organ quietly running dozens of processes at once so everything else can function without you noticing a thing. It regulates how glucose is stored and released throughout the day. It manages how fat is processed and transported. It produces the bile your digestion depends on. It breaks down hormones once they've done their job. It regulates cholesterol. It supports immune function. And it processes nearly everything that enters your bloodstream, from food compounds to medication. Given that workload, it makes sense that problems here rarely stay isolated. They ripple outward into your energy, your digestion, your skin, your weight, your mood. Here's where it gets important. When an ultrasound detects fat inside liver tissue, a condition called hepatic steatosis, in most people who don't drink heavily, the cause isn't how much fat they're eating. It's insulin. More specifically, a state called insulin resistance, where cells gradually stop responding efficiently to insulin's signal. When that happens, the liver starts converting excess sugar into fat through a process called de novo lipogenesis. It's manufacturing fat internally because the normal pathways aren't working the way they should. So why doesn't the liver just tell you when this starts? This is the part almost nobody understands, and it explains everything about why fatty liver catches people off guard. Unlike your stomach, which reacts almost instantly when something's wrong, your liver has very few pain receptors. It can be under real metabolic strain, accumulating fat, developing early inflammation, and still produce nothing resembling a clear symptom. At most, some people feel a vague fullness beneath the right ribs, easy to mistake for bloating. Many people feel nothing at all. That silence isn't reassurance. It's simply the absence of an alarm this organ was never built to have. And now, the visible sign. Look at the back of your neck. Look under your arms, at your elbows, around any skin folds. If the skin there looks noticeably darker than the skin around it, not from sun, not from friction, but a consistent, almost velvety darkening that has a name: acanthos nigricans. It isn't a pigmentation issue. It doesn't respond to moisturizer. It develops because elevated circulating insulin, present when cells stop responding to it properly, stimulates excess skin cell growth in areas of warmth and friction. It is, quite literally, a visible marker of what's happening beneath the surface. Most people have never been told what it means. Some have been told it's just cosmetic. It isn't. Here's why an early mild result still matters. Not because grade 1 means crisis. It doesn't. But because the process that created grade 1 didn't start last month. It started years ago. Left alone, it can move quietly from mild fat accumulation to inflammation, then to scarring, and eventually to damage that no longer reverses. The earlier stage is the window where meaningful change is still very possible, because the liver still holds real regenerative capacity here. That capacity narrows the longer the underlying pressure continues. This rarely shows up alone. Picture a woman in her mid-60s, active, not a heavy drinker, in for a routine checkup. For the past year, she's felt more tired than usual, and she has an explanation ready. Poor sleep. Stress. A hard season with family. Each explanation makes sense on its own. Together, they form a chain of reasoning that quietly bypasses the actual cause. Her blood work tells a different story. Triglycerides slightly elevated. Fasting glucose sitting right at the borderline. ATL, the protective cholesterol, a little lower than it should be. None of these numbers alone would set off alarms. But together, alongside a fatty liver finding, they describe something specific. A cluster of related disturbances often called metabolic syndrome, generally driven by the same root cause: insulin resistance. This cluster carries meaningfully higher long-term risk for cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and progression of liver-related complications. These conditions travel together. That's exactly why noticing one should prompt a closer look at the others. Beyond blood work, there are signals worth paying attention to in ordinary daily life. Fatigue that doesn't lift no matter how much you sleep, distinct from ordinary tiredness, tied to how the liver participates in energy and glucose regulation. Weight that concentrates specifically around the abdomen rather than being spread evenly, because abdominal fat behaves differently than fat elsewhere. It's metabolically active tissue. It releases inflammatory signals and worsens insulin resistance, feeding a loop that circles right back to liver stress. A heavy, sluggish feeling after meals that wasn't there years ago, often dismissed as simply eating more than you used to. When someone over 60 shows this skin change alongside elevated triglycerides, borderline glucose, abdominal weight gain, and a fatty liver finding, that combination isn't a list of minor, unrelated things to keep an eye on. It's one coherent picture, and it deserves to be treated as one, not filed away for a follow-up appointment 6 months down the line. Here's the encouraging part, because there is one. These signals share a single root cause. That means they don't each need a separate solution. When insulin sensitivity improves, the whole picture tends to shift together. And the liver, specifically, has a remarkable capacity to repair itself once the pressure driving the damage is reduced. Research has consistently shown that even a modest reduction in body weight, somewhere around 7 to 10%, achieved gradually, is associated with measurable improvement in liver fat and inflammation. So what actually reduces that pressure? Most general advice falls short here, because eat less, exercise more describes the outcome without explaining the mechanism. And without the mechanism, it's easy to make changes that miss the real driver. Start with what genuinely helps. The liver isn't primarily overwhelmed by dietary fat. It's overwhelmed by what it's forced to do with excess glucose and fructose when insulin signaling isn't working. Understanding that shifts the whole question, from what should I cut to what actually restores insulin sensitivity and gives this organ what it needs to repair. Whole eggs are worth reconsidering, particularly the yolk, despite decades of advice to avoid it. Egg yolks contain choline, a nutrient directly involved in how the liver packages and exports fat. Without enough choline, fat is more likely to stay inside liver cells instead of being transported out. Choline insufficiency is more common than most people realize, especially past 60. Black coffee, without heavy sweeteners, has the more consistently supported associations in liver research, linked to lower liver enzyme levels and slower disease progression in observational studies. The benefit appears tied to compounds in coffee itself, not the sugar that usually rides along with it. Cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, support the liver's natural detoxification pathways and help lower oxidative stress in liver tissue over time. Fatty fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel, supply omega-3 fatty acids associated with reduced liver triglycerides and lower systemic inflammation, generally with regular intake of a couple of servings a week. Fiber deserves particular attention because its impact is consistently underestimated. Fiber from vegetables, legumes, whole fruit, oats, and barley feeds beneficial gut bacteria, which produce short-chain fatty acids shown to reduce liver inflammation and improve insulin sensitivity. This gut-liver connection is a real, active area of research. What happens in your intestines has direct downstream effects on what your liver has to manage. Adequate protein at each meal matters too, since diets low in protein but high in refined carbohydrate keep insulin elevated and leave the liver without the amino acids it needs for repair. Now, what works against this process, because naming it clearly changes how people relate to their daily choices. The single largest dietary driver of fatty liver in people who don't drink heavily isn't fat. It's sugar, specifically fructose. Here's why that distinction matters. Unlike glucose, which nearly every cell in the body can use directly, fructose is metabolized almost exclusively in the liver. When it arrives in large, concentrated amounts, which happens easily in liquid form, the liver converts the excess into fat. It's simply doing what it's built to do. The issue is volume and frequency, not the mechanism itself. This shows up in places people rarely suspect. Fruit juice, flavored waters, sweetened coffee drinks, commercial smoothies all deliver concentrated fructose without the fiber that would normally slow its absorption in whole fruit. Refined carbohydrates, white bread, packaged cereal, pastries, instant noodles, heavily processed sauces, spike glucose rapidly and keep insulin chronically elevated. Even modest alcohol interferes with the liver's ability to burn fat efficiently, and when alcohol is combined with sugar, as in many cocktails, sweet wines, and beer, the two effects compound each other. Fat production rises while fat metabolism drops at the same time. Ultra-processed snack foods deserve a specific mention because they're often treated as harmless in moderation. Many are engineered with precise combinations of refined flour, sugar, industrial fats, and salt designed to override the body's normal fullness signals, encouraging you to eat well past actual hunger. The liver absorbs the consequences of that engineering. None of this is meant to create guilt about past choices. Understanding the mechanism tends to do something more useful than guilt ever does. It turns dietary change from a restriction into something that feels closer to protecting an organ that's been quietly working for you for decades. It's worth being precise about what reversal actually looks like, because the word gets used loosely and creates unrealistic expectations. Early-stage fatty liver, particularly grade 1 or grade 2, without significant inflammation, is genuinely associated with meaningful improvement when the underlying metabolic pressure is reduced. The liver has one of the strongest regenerative capacities of any organ in the human body. But this isn't something that happens from a 2-week cleanse or cutting one food while everything else stays the same. It happens through a sustained shift in the conditions the liver operates in, day after day. Practically, that shift tends to include a few consistent elements. Reducing liquid sugar tends to be the fastest lever, not necessarily eliminating it entirely, but cutting it back consistently and replacing it with water, plain coffee, or unsweetened tea, a change that can influence fat production pathways within weeks. Prioritizing protein and fiber at meals helps blunt insulin spikes and supports satiety. Regular movement matters more than intense exercise here, because skeletal muscle is the body's largest site for glucose disposal. Active muscle pulls glucose out of the bloodstream before the liver has to process the excess into fat. Even a daily walk changes the metabolic load your liver is carrying, in a way that's mechanistically real, not just anecdotal. Sleep quality is part of this picture too, more than people expect. Poor sleep raises cortisol, increases cravings for high glucose foods, and worsens insulin sensitivity. The metabolic environment during rest genuinely matters for liver health, not just for how you feel the next morning. There's also a broader life stage pattern worth sitting with, especially past 60. This is often a period when routines have been in place for decades. A daily glass of juice, a nightly bowl of cereal, a sedentary afternoon. These habits feel so automatic they no longer register as choices at all. That's part of what makes conditions like this so common in this age group. It's rarely one dramatic decision that leads here. It's thousands of small, repeated, invisible ones, compounding quietly over years, the way a slow drip eventually fills a container nobody was watching. The reassuring part is that the same principle works in reverse. Small, repeated, sustainable adjustments produce compounding benefit the other way, even when no single day feels like it's making much difference. It's also worth understanding why this decade specifically tends to be when these findings surface. Hormonal shifts that come with aging, changes in muscle mass, and years of accumulated metabolic strain tend to converge around this period, which is part of why routine screening becomes more relevant with age. This isn't cause for alarm. It's simply useful context. Your body at 60 runs under a different set of conditions than it did at 30. The same habits can produce different results now. That shift is worth adjusting for, not fighting. The people who see the most meaningful improvement generally aren't chasing perfection. They're the ones who consistently address the biggest daily contributors: the liquid sugar, the nightly refined carbohydrate, the long stretches of sitting, while gradually adding in what actually supports repair. Not all at once. Over time. The liver, despite its silence, is a remarkably patient organ when it's finally given the right conditions. So here's what's worth carrying forward. A fatty liver finding isn't a verdict. It's information. An early, genuinely actionable signal that your metabolic system has been under more pressure than you realized. And now that you understand the mechanism behind it, that 6-month follow-up appointment means something different than it did an hour ago. Start by noticing what you're drinking this week, since liquid sugar is usually the fastest lever available to you. Notice whether your meals lean heavily toward carbohydrates without enough protein or fiber alongside them. And notice whether you're moving consistently, not intensely, just consistently, because that alone changes what your liver is being asked to handle every single day. The liver is one of the few organs in the human body capable of meaningful self-repair when given the right conditions. That isn't an exaggerated claim. It's simply how the tissue behaves in the research. But it requires treating an early, mild finding as the useful signal it actually is, instead of something to file away and revisit only once it's already progressed further. Your body rarely announces these things loudly the first time. It tends to speak quietly, through a number on a lab report, or a subtle change in the skin, long before it ever needs to raise its voice. This is usually the first warning, and the first one is almost always the one you still have the power to act on.